What's going on, guys, and welcome back. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Jesse Laval. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing the Canon EOS RP. Now, the Canon RP doesn't shoot like really crazy fast frames per second. It's only 5 frames per second, and then if you start using like servo autofocus mode, it kicks down to even 4 frames per second. So it's not really what you would say is an action or sports camera, but that being said, it still can be used for those things. It's just not going to get you every single split second shot, right? It's going to shoot a little bit slower, but the autofocus still works very well. Even though it's not the dual pixel 2 autofocus, you don't have animal eye tracking, and it probably is a little bit slower to respond than the latest and greatest that Canon has to offer, but when you consider the price point, and the autofocus still works extremely well, some of my best bird in flight shots came from the Canon RP. So once you get used to the way the RP works, and you figure out the limitations that it has and you accept those and you work around them, this camera is very capable of taking pretty much any shot that you would want. Remember, cameras are pretty advanced now, and even something that might not stack up to the latest and greatest is still going to be a very capable piece of hardware. So don't discount the little Canon RP. It's a really great camera. Now, another thing that I tend to use my RP for is vlogging. And that's actually due to the fact that the R6 has IBIS in it, or internal body stabilization. And for some reason, when it comes to just like walking around or trying to do vlog shots, lens with stabilization and the in-body stabilization, which have to work together on the R6, tends to result in kind of like weird kind of motion because of the stabilization, where I find if I use a stabilized lens with no internal body stabilization, like my RP has, I get better results with kind of walking. Now, I'm not saying they're like gliding around like being on a gimbal or anything, but I find the shake to be a little more natural than the shake that comes from the internal body stabilization mixing with the lens stabilization. And that was one of the things that was a little bit disappointing to me about using the R6 with the IBIS. So that's kind of something that I still use my RP for. On top of that, it's kind of just a lighter body, so that's nicer as far as just holding it out there and walking around and vlogging, where the R6 can start to get heavier a little bit quickly. So all in all, guys, what I'm basically trying to get out there is that the EOS RP for a casual user or somebody who's looking to not like really break the bank but get a camera that's going to produce nice quality for you, it's definitely a viable option. So when it comes to the autofocus, guys, the autofocus is honestly very good on this. It's not to the level of the Canon R6 with dual pixel 2 autofocus. This is just the regular dual pixel autofocus. But if you're looking to shoot stuff like portraits or city or something that's not going to demand absolutely crazy fast autofocus, this camera's going to work absolutely fine for you. It's got eye tracking that works really well on people, just not animals. But if you don't shoot wildlife and you're more of a portrait photographer, or you just like to do landscapes or things like that, this camera works perfectly. It's going to do everything that you need. The autofocus is very, very good, while just not having some of the latest and greatest tricks that were introduced in some of the newer camera bodies like the R6 and R5. When it comes to high ISO performance, the sensor's honestly pretty good. It's not comparable to the R6, but it's semi-close. I mean, I've shot stuff at ISO 12,800 that were recoverable. Obviously, I was using, denoising software in post. But to be able to shoot something at 12,800 ISO and still recover it, that's pretty good. So, I mean, you can shoot in low light. You can use it for video. It shoots really nice video, although I do think it's worth just sticking with the profiles that come with the camera. I don't recommend trying to use like C-Log or Cinestyle profiles. You can. They work. If that's what you like to do, keep doing it. I just think at the end of the day, the 8-bit files don't provide the flexibility that you need for color correcting with log profiles. So I don't think at the end of the day it really comes out any better than the colors that are going to come out just straight out of the camera. And I think you're probably going to end up with more noise than if you just use straight out of the camera. Even though it does bake in those colors and give you less flexibility in post, it's one of the limitations of the camera. But again, if you're willing to just work with the way the camera is designed, it's going to produce beautiful content for you. Really, really awesome camera. I've been extremely happy with it. It's lighter, it's smaller, it's easier to just kind of walk around with it all day. So it's got advantages going for it. It's still really an awesome camera today. As far as the image quality goes, this camera produces absolutely beautiful image quality. If I shot with my R6 and then I took a shot with this and I put them side by side, you'd never be able to tell me the difference between the two. Obviously, you know, if I'm pushing the super extremes of the files or something, yes, there's going to be differences there. So again, guys, the overall consensus with the Canon RP is, if you're looking for a camera that's around $1,000, I don't think there's going to be a better camera that you could consider. It's got a full-frame sensor, 26 megapixels, the files are really good while not being the best, and you can shoot video, being it in 1080p instead of 4K. It does have a 4K mode, but basically forget about it because they kind of, you know, Canon cripple hammered it so bad that it's really not worth using. But in 1080p, this camera works extremely well. You're going to get great footage from it. When it comes to shooting stills, it works great. I know the frames per second aren't that fast, but it still works. You can still shoot birds in flight. Let me show you some of the shots that I've gotten with it. Some of my best bird in flight shots have come off from the EOS RP. Like I said, it's got limitations. You got to learn them. You got to work around them. But once you do that, this camera is extremely capable. So the Canon RP, while not being like a super fancy camera, kind of does everything that it needs to make it so that it can do what it needs to do for you to get you really awesome content. All of the important things are there. The autofocus, pretty good, right? Right, it doesn't have the latest and greatest stuff like the dual pixel 2 autofocus systems on the new cameras, but if you want eye tracking, it's here. If you want beautiful footage as far as video quality goes, it's here. Do you want to be able to shoot with higher ISOs? You've got a full frame sensor, it's gonna do it. Now, C-Log is not in this camera, so forget about that. You can get, you know, third-party log profiles, or you can get Cine-style profiles. I don't recommend them. I don't think they work good. Just stick with what Canon gave you. You're going to get beautiful shots out of it. The neutral profile allows a little bit of flexibility there, so you can use that and then kind of color grade. And then if you decide that you really need to step it up, you're probably going to end up getting one of the other bodies like an R6 or an R5 down the road anyway. One thing I do want to mention about the RP, it does have a silent mode in it, but again, it's been Canon cripple hammered. It's set into its own little auto mode, and you cannot change any of you can't change your shutter speed, you can't change your ISO, you can't change your aperture. So everything is basically set in this weird little auto mode, which makes your silent shutter mode basically completely useless. So forget about the silent shutter mode, it's junk. Forget about the 4K shooting with this Canon, it's junk. But 1080p video, beautiful. The stills that come out of it, beautiful. You're going to get that nice depth of field that comes from full frame sensors. You're going to get that high ISO performance that comes from full frame sensors. It's not going to produce as high of ISO performance as some of the latest and greatest sensors, but it's still going to be very good. The colors that come out of it are great. The way everything that comes out of this camera is awesome. It's built very tough. It's built small. It's built compact. You've got the vari-angle touchscreen like everybody wants. The viewfinder looks great. There's not a ton of lag in it. It's not perfect. The R6 and the R5 did improve upon the electronic viewfinders, but this one is still very good, very bright. Doesn't lag enough to really affect you at all. Now, you only got one card slot in this, UHS 2 card slot, only one, whatever, get over it, it's not a big deal. Bigger deal is that it has smaller batteries, so you're going to need 2, probably 3 batteries to go with it, because this thing can chew up the batteries pretty good. Guys, if you're looking at a camera, you don't want to spend a whole lot more than $1,000 on the body, just go ahead and pick up the RP. You're going to be happy with it. It produces really awesome quality stills and video footage. If you're shooting wildlife, I love to shoot wildlife, did it all the time with the RP. It's not an ideal wildlife camera. That doesn't mean you can't use it for that. I used it for it all the time. Some of my best bird in flight shots came from the Canon RP. I'm not saying I wouldn't have loved to have higher frame rates. I do, like I do now with my R6. But as far as price point, having a full frame camera, this thing still will get the job done for you. You're just going to have to be a little more tactical about how you use your camera. And that's something that photographers have done for years. So stop complaining about it and just pick up the camera and use it. Once you get used to its limitations, you're going to be able to get beautiful, beautiful action shots, okay? I promise you, just work around the limitations, accept the camera for what it is, and it's going to do what you want it to do. Now, the RAW files, they're not the best. They're still very good, but when it comes to like comparing it to something like the R6 files, I'm able to recover the shadows a lot more before noise is introduced on an R6, whereas usually I try to limit myself to not going any higher than plus 55 on shadow recovery. Once I go any higher than that in Adobe Photoshop, it really starts to present too much noise and I don't like it. So you've got flexibility with your RAWs, of course you do. They work really good. They're just not the best RAWs in the world, but they're still very good. Don't let me like talk you out of getting this camera. It's definitely worth picking up, especially if your price point isn't going to go higher than that. You got to remember, for any significant amount of better technology, you're spending over double the price. Okay, you're going to have to get an R6, which is going to cost $2,500 instead of $1,000. Okay, so think about it. Is $1,500 worth slightly better RAW files or getting C-Log? If the answer to you is yes, then you're looking at an R6 or possibly an R5. If the answer to you is I'm not spending over $1,000 for a body, welcome to the Canon RP. Go ahead and order it. Now, something if you are moving over to full frame system for your first time that is worth mentioning is the additional expenses that are going to come with moving over to full frame. If you have been using APS-C sensor cameras and you thought the lenses were expensive for those cameras, get ready for a whole new ballgame when it comes to full frame lenses. Full frame lenses are so much more expensive that if you're thinking that the cost of the body here is going to be what really hurts you, you're going to be really upset when you start looking at new lenses for your camera. Because if you want any type of fast glass, 2.8, 1.8, 1.4, things are going to get really expensive really quick. And we're talking about thousands of dollars. APS-C sensors, you're usually talking about hundreds of dollars. Full frame cameras, you're going to be looking at thousands of dollars for new lenses for your body. So that's something that you really should think about before you take the dive into the full frame world. Because you really don't want to be using any EFS glass. You can on these new bodies because they do have a crop mode, but it significantly reduces your image quality and reduces the megapixel count that you're getting. So you really don't want to be using EFS lenses on these cameras. This is a 1080p shooter as far as video goes. This is semi-limited as far as its RAW photos go, but it's still very, very good. Don't let me make you think that this is bad in any way, but if you're somebody who wants the best of the best, then you want to skip on this and you're going to spend, probably $1,500 more to get something significantly better than this camera. You could go for the R, that's a little bit better, but it's going to be not that much better. So, the way I look at it, you either go for the RP, save your money, test the waters, accept the fact that it's going to have some limitations in today's grades, but it's still going to produce really awesome content for you at the end of the day. If you're a power user and you want something that's the latest and the greatest, you're going to probably be looking at an R6 or an R5. You're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars more. So, is this the price point that you want to spend? This is probably going to be the camera for you. If it's not and you're thinking you've got the money to spend more, then yeah, there's going to be better camera bodies out there right now that you can get, but they're going to cost a lot more money. Again, guys, if you think this video helped you in any way, think about going below, subscribing, clicking my notification bell, and I'll see you on my next video.